Okay, well, it's come up to 9:30, so it's time for me to open the hearing sessions on day 4 of the South Tyneside local plan examination. For those of you who haven't attended previous sessions, just to introduce myself, my name is David Spencer, and I'm the independent examining inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out the examination into the submitted South Tyneside local plan. Can I just check, we've got not as busy as other days, but can everybody hear me okay? Am I necessarily see me? Yep, thank you. Can I, at this early stage, just ask people to please ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please. And I think there are people who haven't attended previous sessions, so please can I ask the Council for the usual housekeeping, please.
Yes, no problem. Good morning, everybody. We're not expecting any fire alarms this morning, so if there is an alarm, please can you make your way out the nearest fire exit, which is just on the far side of the room, and then make your way to the far side of the hotel car park. Toilets are just outside of this room across the corridor. Please be careful when you're moving around the room because there are cables taped to the floor, so just make sure you don't trip on those. And also the hotel operates a parking eye system in the car park, so if you have parked your car there, make sure you've entered your registration details at the hotel reception. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, these are obviously sessions that are held in public, but it's only people who are seated around the table who will have the right to be heard and to contribute to the discussion that we'll be having this morning. These are the first of kind of 2 discussions on site-specific proposals within the plan. This is the first of many sessions I'll be having over this week and next on specific sites, and these are sites that would require an alteration to the existing Greenbelt boundaries in order for them to come forward. In terms of how these hearing sessions work, they are intended to be reasonably informal but structured discussions, which I shall lead based on agendas that I've published previously, which ratchet back to my matters, issues and questions, which were a reflection of the representations that people had made on the submitted plan, or the proposed submitted plan, back in early 2024. I appreciate evidence doesn't always remain static, so there have been further things that have developed, that have progressed since early 2024, and undoubtedly we'll come on to discuss some of those, not least the playing pitch strategy. I'll seek to bring people in at various points of the discussion, but if there's a particular point you want to bring to my attention and come in on the discussion at a particular point that's relevant to your representation, the convention is to upend your nameplate, and that will signal to me to bring you in at that particular point. In terms of this morning's session, we're going to first look at proposed site GA1, which is the land at the South Tyneside College Hebburn campus, site GA1 in the plan. And as you'll have seen from my agenda, I'll probably take then a brief break, and then we'll resume to discuss the Wardley Colliery proposal at policy SP14, and the programme for this morning is to sit solely for this morning. I am going to be imposing a relatively strict 12:30 curfew, so if we haven't concluded discussion by 12:30, it will have to move into a potential reserve session, but hopefully we'll cover the necessary ground this morning. That's all I wanted to say by way of sort of brief introductory remarks to today's session. Hopefully people are reasonably clear on how these hearing sessions work. Perhaps if I can turn at this stage to the Council to introduce who will be assisting me this morning from the Council's team.
Ms. Porsche.
Okay, my name's Deborah Lamb. I'm the Operations Manager of the Spatial Plan team at South Tyneside Council.
Morning, sir. Andrew Inch, Senior Manager for the Planning Service at the Council.
Rachel Cooper, Senior Plan and Policy Officer at South Tyneside Council.
Thank you. And we go round the table, please.
Good morning, sir. James Finch, representing National Highways.
Morning, sir. David Maguire, representing Sport England.
Morning. Robin Wood, R&K Planning for Thomas Armstrong Holdings.
Chris Martin from Pegasus Group, representing Bellway Homes Limited North East.
Now, I did omit to mention in my introductory remarks these sessions are being recorded and live streamed, so they are be available to view for those who are interested in these sessions. Can I just double check, does anybody wish to make their own recording of this session for any reason? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, if I can ask people now to first turn to my agenda. We'll discuss matter 5, it's issue 2, so it is the site, which was the land at South Tyneside College, the Hebburn campus site GA1, which comes under policy SP7 of the plan. I am going to go through my agenda, but before I do, my agenda and sort of thinking about my matters, issues and questions preceded 2 signed statements of common ground that the council has entered into or has prepared. The first one is with Bellway Homes North East, and the second was with Sport England. I could just invite I've read the statements of common ground, but I'd just invite the council to perhaps just briefly summarise where those statements of common ground get us to and what they potentially mean in relation to this specific site. I appreciate it's covering areas of agreement and residual areas of disagreement.
Yeah, so I think with the statement of common ground with Bellway Homes, the main sort of things to cover were
broader issues other than just the site we're discussing this morning, but there is a section specifically in there in relation to the GA1 proposed allocation and where that sets.
So there's anything either from Mr. Martin or Mr. Maguire that you'd like to bring to my attention, having obviously entered into these statements of common ground, which are helpful to me, whether there's anything specific at this early stage you'd like to bring to my attention. So, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. It's really just to bring you to your attention. There's a plan that was appended to the statement of common ground. That plan has now been submitted formally to the council as a pre-application inquiry, just to bring you up to speed. Yes, I think that's the one, sir.
Clear on plans. I've got one plan that kind of shows where you suggest the boundary for the site allocation, but in terms of pre-application, is it?
Yes,
the
that's
layouts?
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Maguire, is there anything you wish to say at this preliminary stage around the statement of common ground?
Nothing further at the moment, so that isn't covered by the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on then to the agenda, as I indicated, this is a site that requires or would result in a proposed alteration to the green belts. We've looked at yesterday and preceding days. I'm going to describe them as some of the sort of the higher level kind of basis for demonstrating exceptional circumstances. Obviously drilling down then at site specific level, again considering whether whether exceptional circumstances apply. Would these alterations result in sustainable development? If there is a degree of harm to the green belt, the extent to which any kind of consequential impacts on the purposes of the green belt have kind of been reduced to their kind of lowest reasonable reasonably practicable extent. So I think I'd like to invite the Council first at item 2 on my agenda. The justification when we look at the Greenbelt review, I think this comes under a relatively small parcel, HE1 of the Greenbelt review, and the recommendations within the Greenbelt review about how sort of that impacts can be offset through compensatory improvements and how that's fed into the plan, please.
No problem. So, yes, the site itself was considered as part of the Greenbelt study, and obviously we discussed the methodology in terms of how those ratings were determined yesterday. This site itself scores low or no impact against purposes 1, 3 and 4 of the Greenbelt study, and scores a moderate against purpose 2, which is separation between neighbouring towns. I'd say the highest harm for that rating was moderate, so the council considered that the site did not pose a significant degree of harm to the overall Greenbelt within South Tyneside. The Greenbelt study also includes Appendix C, which sets out compensatory measures to be considered for the site. It sets out a menu with different options, which enhancements in the Greenbelt and surrounding area. From those, a number have been incorporated into the key considerations in policy SP7, and those are highlighted in the Council's MIQ response in paragraph 5.102. Let's also note the supporting text to the policy also refers to the Greenbelt study and the South Tyneside Green-Blue infrastructure strategy, also with regard to compensatory improvements for this site, and they've sort of been fed into the site frameworks document, which provides a little bit more detail in terms of opportunities for the site in terms of mitigation measures.
Thank you for that. I mean, in terms of just looking at the site frameworks document, I think it's document HOU2 in the examination library is one of the supporting documents. Obviously, that looks at kind of site constraints, site opportunities, kind of informs the potential and the capacity of the various sites, not just GA1 but other sites. How does the council kind of consider the status of that document going forward? Obviously, it's supporting evidence to this plan. I think probably where I'm driving at is, did the council give kind of thought to, did you want to kind of reflect or embed any of the kind of the evidence from the site frameworks, where it kind of gives us a kind of concept framework within the plan? Would that be necessary for soundness, or is it something that's going to kind of sit there, if the plan is adopted, kind of be used as kind of evidence to kind of help shape development proposals as they come forward?
Yeah, I think at the moment there's no intention to sort of embed that within the plan itself. It would be sort of more of a supporting document to sort of be referred to as and when plan applications came forward. I think some of the key principles within the site framework document have been considered in terms of the key considerations of the sites, and I think also within the wider policies within the local plan, I think they also would reflect the asks of the site framework document as well.
Thank you. And just, I mean, I have, just for the benefit of everybody, I've visited the site, seen its context and its current condition, etc. Just so I'm clear in my mind, and I've got sort of the extract from the Greenbelt review study in front of me. So this is really sort of at the boundary of the borough. So from beyond kind of Wardley Lane, you're then into neighbouring Gateshead. So the boundary of the borough goes pretty much up to, is it the metro, the bridge over the metro?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, I don't know, in terms of obviously the exceptional circumstances case, obviously heard there from the council in terms of how this site has been assessed through the Greenbelt review. I'm assuming, from having read your statement and Regulation 19 reps, there's little dispute in terms of the overall assessment of how this parcel has been considered, but it's probably the boundary or how that's kind of reflected in the plan that's the principal issue. As the council's identified, separation of neighbouring settlements is probably the highest harm, albeit at a moderate, it's assessed at a moderate degree of impact. Can I seek, it's probably point 2.2 on my agenda in terms of the extent of the proposed allocation and the boundaries that have been identified, and whether it's necessary for soundness for those to be altered further.
Thank you, sir. Yes, just to confirm, you're correct. We think that the Greenbelt study is suitably robust. It's based on a sound methodology. We agree with the conclusions that it's drawn. Obviously, we discussed yesterday about exceptional circumstances. If you're convinced, sir, that exceptional circumstances do exist for a Greenbelt alteration, I would suggest this site is one of the ones which would have the least impact on the Greenbelt. It's a very logical extension to Hebburn, as in my clients develop land to the north, they can easily punch through into this site. There's no ransom strips or anything like that. But you're also correct to highlight there is a bit of a dispute on the extent of the boundary. Previous drafts have had the boundary drawn further south, and you'll pick up in our statement of common ground that that's an area of disagreement. The rationale behind it is there isn't any intention from my client to develop houses right up to that boundary. The reason why we were seeking a larger boundary is more to do with experiences we've had elsewhere where you have a site and then you are relying on other things going next to it that are going to remain in the green belt. For instance, I was involved in a site for another house builder in Newcastle, and it was an allocation, and we had a similar issue there with SUDs and allotments, and it was determined at that EIP that that part could remain in the green belt, which was fine. And then we got to the planning application stage, and I think what people weren't envisaging is all the paraphernalia that then goes with things like allotments, and we ended up being in a whole mire of green belt assessments just to put some allotments on, because you have storage containers, you have sheds, you have all that sort of stuff. In our pre-app, we have provided a playing pitch to the south as part of the mitigation for the playing pitches. We're aware that again might need some sort of ancillary stuff to go with it in terms of maybe parking or other facilities. I'm just wary about being caught in that trap again and having to go through the rigmarole of doing in my mind an unnecessary greenbelt assessment to prove that there's no harm to the openness of the green belt for that. So it's more of a practical thing than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can just turn to the Council on this part of the agenda to and the extent of the proposed allocation and the boundaries. Obviously, I'll have in mind paragraph 143 of the National Planning Policy Framework when defining greenbelt boundaries. Part F of paragraph 143 define boundaries clearly using physical features that are readily recognisable and likely to be permanent. Obviously, I've been to the site. I've seen where the proposed boundaries intended to be kind of redrawn. It clearly doesn't follow physical features on the ground. It's cutting across this area of open land. Can I draw a conclusion that that would remain consistent with national planning policy?
Yes, so obviously the site allocation itself does cut across the field. Where the line has been drawn is sort of reflective of the built development on the other side of the road, where there's a residential area. The land to the south really is there to sort of act as a bit of a buffer between the built development and the Greenbelt and the local authority boundary, because of the Greenbelt study in terms of the highest harm was in terms of the closing of settlements between South Tyneside and Gateshead. The retaining that as Greenbelt would allow for obviously Greenbelt compatible uses to be provided in there in terms of mitigation, so particularly BNG, obviously the playing field, that's been sort of mentioned as well. So we would we would sort of propose that the boundary would be sort of made in terms of that site allocation, in terms of the landscaping and the mitigation that would go into that area of land.
Thank you. I mean, I'll put it to the council. I'm not suggesting this is a modification I would be recommending at this stage, but just to kind of gauge the council's view on this. Whereas I feel from having visited the site and from reading Bellway Homes' submission that an alternative, there would be a reason for soundness to amend the boundary so it followed the Wardley Lane as a physical feature, possibly in combination with additional policy content within policy SP7 that kind of made clear what's intended here in terms of open space, biodiversity net gain, and there was further specificity. I don't like that word, but I'm afraid it keeps happening in planning. Within policy SP7 that kind of drew that distinction. I appreciate the council's conferring.
Clearly, if no development is intended on that part of the site, and having regard to its relative sensitivity, and it's meant to endure as undeveloped land in Greenbelt terms well into the future, and is capable of being landscaped in a way which provides that identifiable boundary between the built and the unbuilt area. There's no reason why it shouldn't proceed on a current basis in my submission. However, if you do take the view that the boundary ought to change to bring it in line with paragraph 143, then it's very important that the policy should be modified in order to strengthen the importance of the role of the unbuilt area in terms of its function as mitigation and open land as part of the overall allocation.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, will you want to come in on what I've sort of aired or articulated there?
Yes, thank you, sir. Obviously, it's for you to ruminate and decide as to what is appropriate. But from my client's point of view, your suggestion about having the boundary, the southern extent is Wardley Lane, and having a clear policy steer about what goes in that southern bit, to me sounds like a sensible way forward, and it would, as I said, it would avoid us, if there is anything that's classed technically as development in the green belt, then it would allow us then to not have to go through the rigmarole of a site-specific green belt assessment. It sounds to me like a pragmatic way forward. Thank you.
I mean, just picking up, put that to the council. I understand the council's position is you consider you've submitted a sound plan, and that should be the basis it goes forward. Just being sort of devil's advocate for a moment with you, Mr. Martin, in terms of, you say, the rigmarole, in terms of national planning policy, policies of the plan, in terms of the types of uses that are envisaged, are they not inappropriate development within the greenbelt? Things like compensate biodiversity net gain, open space provision, pitch provision.
I would say on the face of it, so that's correct. It's any of the ancillary things that go with it. So the plans for the pitches haven't been completely, the replacement pitch to the south hasn't been completely crystallised, but it may be that there need to be some storage facilities for people who use the pitch. There may need to be a bit of car parking, that sort of thing. And it may end up being, in the example that I used last, that I explained before in Newcastle, it was not so much that the uses were incompatible with the green belt, but they were allowed in the green belt providing they don't affect the openness. And the green belt assessment I had to undertake at that point in time was all about does that materially affect the openness of the green belt? And I just, as I said, I just wanted to avoid it because it just becomes an unnecessary policy burden for my client to then go through. And I'm aware obviously that the government in its current guise is saying to us that we need to be reducing the burdens on developers in order to bring sites forward for the homes that are needed.
We can usefully add anything more to our justification for the approach we wish to take. And one has to be very careful. It's all very well sitting around this table saying, well, we want to sort of loosen the criteria a little bit so we can provide particular types of built development there to support the recreational use. That's great around this table, but once you let go of that restriction, it opens up a whole prospect in future years for applications to be determined otherwise than in accordance with the development plan, because it will be possible to demonstrate material circumstances. That protection will be lost, and we have to bear in mind the fact that we are dealing here with a limited resource in terms of the green belt, and its release is something of great sensitivity, and we acknowledge that. We acknowledge how difficult it is. So we have to treat this resource very carefully. That's all I would say.
Thank you. If I can just be clear from the council's perspective and thinking back through to the statements of common ground, I appreciate, as I said earlier, you consider the plan as it's presented is sound, but in terms of the kind of the wider approach to this location, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not reading a kind of a view from the council about this remaining sort of area of green belts at this stage being considered suitable for providing open space or biodiversity net gain in association with what's inside, what would be inside the amended green belt proposal.
Yes, we do envision that area of land would be providing the mitigation for the site. Like I say, we've touched on the playing field issue already there, so we would be anticipating that mitigation would be provided on that site for the proposed allocation.
That's fine. I think I find myself torn between examining a plan under the 2023 National Planning Policy Framework and then what could be happening at the coalface in terms of once the plan's adopted. And I'm just putting it out here as just kind of something to kind of think about or consider in terms of ultimately what wants to be achieved or secured at this location. Thinking back to the idea or proposal I was kind of erring in terms of amending the green belt now with further kind of specificity about open space provision to provide a degree of certainty about how this wider parcel could come forward, versus if the green belt boundary remains as presented, is there a risk under the current national planning policy framework that this could potentially be seen as a grey belt area between two towns?
There is that potential.
And whether that points at this stage to whether modifying the green belt boundary and having that kind of clear policy content for use that would provide openness in this location is something that, as Mr. Martin says, for me to ruminate on, but I'm just airing it now for the Council's consideration.
It's a valid observation. And if on balance you feel that the protection is best afforded by changing the proposed green belt boundary there and reinforcing the policy, then that's a matter for your discretion.
Thank you. If I do go down that route, obviously that would be part of a post-hearings kind of correspondence, and the council would then have a, decide what you would like to do, or how you'd like to take that forward. But I'm just there. I'm not saying at this stage that's where I'm going. Mr. Martin.
No, sorry, sir, I don't really have anything to add to what Mr. Shadowravian says. It's just to point out that it doesn't necessarily have to be in green belt. There are other development management tools that can be used to manage whatever development comes forward in that area.
Thank you. Are there any further points?
Sorry, Section 106 would also provide a mechanism where a condition might be seen to be inadequate to secure the long-term stewardship of that land. And that's something which we could consider to be introduced into the policy as a requirement.
Thank you for that. I'd like to move on to item 3 on my agenda, please, in terms of the suitability and achievability of the site for housing. I think this then brings in, we'll hear from Mr. Maguire from Sport England in terms of the last use, the existing use of this site as playing field. I think I'm sort of understanding from the evidence that this was a site that was previously associated with the campus. Is that the St. Joseph's School site, or is it something completely different? Right.
Yes, so there was a South Tyneside College Hebburn campus, which is now the housing, which is to the north of the site. That was closed back in 2011, and then there was an application in 2014 for the housing that exists next to the proposed allocation at the moment.
I see. So there was built development where I see the newer housing at Regent's Drive, I think it's called, just to the north of this site. Yep. Thank you. I think from reading the various statements of common ground and the evidence before me, there's, notwithstanding the current condition of the site, I have seen grazing horses on there at various points, that it was, its last use was playing field, pitch provision. Obviously, I've got in mind national planning policy framework, and we've looked to the September 2023 edition, the one I'm working to. It's paragraphs 98 and 99, in particular 99 in terms of existing open space, sport, recreational buildings and land. should not be built on until and subject to a variety of criteria. I think there has been an issue for some people. That's the playing pitch strategy, which I think is document NAT 17. It's something that's kind of come forward and sort of been finalised post regulation 19. But just in high level terms, just so that I'm clear in terms of that first part of paragraph 99, the assessment that has been undertaken clearly shows that there is kind of no sort of surplus in existing open space and pitch provision. Mr. Maguire, bring you in first and I'll hear from the council, please.
Thank you, sir. That's correct. I sort of try to summarise the position in Sport England's statement. Rather than there being a surplus of playing field in the Hebburn and Jarrow sub-area, we find that there are particular shortfalls in pitch provision around junior football and in respect of rugby union, so quite the opposite situation to surplus.
Thank you. And does the playing pitch strategy kind of quantify the degree of shortfall versus this kind of existing demand and what might be likely to arise as a consequence of the local plan? Or is it just a kind of headline, there is a shortfall, I mean a quantitative shortfall?
The playing pitch strategy looks at various points in time. Our methodology encourages that, so it looks to the existing point in time and assesses temporal demand against temporal supply for particular pitch types, and then it tries to project forward in respect of what we know about housing growth in terms of the local plan. But it also seeks to combine growth aspirations from some of the clubs in there. And so what we know is that it breaks down that there is a small surplus of adult football pitches. But when you look at the smaller sided games, so junior football, and then it breaks down to smaller sided football, there are shortfalls in those categories, and they are projected to grow in extent over the planned period. In respect of rugby union, the Jarrovians club currently at balance in terms of their provision, but they have quite substantial growth aspirations, which from our understanding with the rugby union, they are struggling to accommodate participants that want to play and form teams. So I think one of the things that the playing pitch strategy suggests there is that land at their home site that's currently set aside for football, it can be recategorised as rugby union pitches, but obviously that has a knock-on effect in its own right.
And just so I'm clear from Sport England's position, obviously the playing pitch strategy and accompanying assessment, as I say, has come in since the plan was consulted on back in 2024. As an organisation, are you broadly content with the approach that's been taken, the methodology that's been used in that assessment and the outputs that have been identified?
Yes, the strategy and the assessment was undertaken in accordance with our methodology. One of the things about the methodology is it encourages a steering group which is made up of the council and various functions within the council, external organisations such as Sport England and the national governing bodies for sport, and all those respective parties signed off the assessment and the playing pitch strategy and action plan.
I can hear you perfectly well, Mr. Maguire, because you're kind of talking to me, but I'm mindful your microphone is slightly off to your left-hand side, so for wider. But I heard all that, so thank you for that. Thank you. And in terms of indicated, coming back to the council under, I think, part 1 of my item 3 on the agenda, Again, looking at the statements of common ground, I don't see there's a kind of a dispute from the council that there is an existing shortfall, there's no surplus, and therefore, in considering this site, there has to be some form of mitigation or replacement provision.
Yes, that's correct, and that's touched on in the plain pitch strategy document as well, in terms of seeking to identify mitigation for that site.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, please.
Thank you, sir. I wouldn't dispute the fact that this was last in use as a playing pitch, but I think it's important to understand the background and the context to this. So these were playing pitches associated with the college campus and largely used by that college before they were shut down, before the college was shut down in 2011. So they have not been in use for 14 years now. I would imagine if there was ever any vision to have them brought back into use, I would suggest it would have been done by now. I think from our point of view, there's a bit of a sort of disconnect between what the policy requires us to do, which I accept its last use as a playing pitch, and actually what the reality is on the ground. And the reality is on the ground is there's very little prospect of these being brought back purely for use as a playing pitch, given the time that's passed. In fact, given the time that's passed, if an application were to go on, while Sport England would be consulted, there would not be a statutory consultee because it's beyond 5 years. For us, it's important to set out that that in that context, in the context that I hope you would agree, sir, is that there is a pressing need for housing in South Tyneside. You look at the housing land supply issues, look at the housing delivery test, and I know we've debated about how constrained the local authority is in terms of it. It's a tight urban area with a green belt boundary around it. That what we're offering in terms of mitigation is entirely appropriate and is acceptable from your point of view. I hope, sir, in terms of having that balance between housing need and being able to mitigate the playing pitch loss, which, as I said, is to me it's more of a policy thing than a reality on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. But is there any dispute from Bellway Homes that, notwithstanding the passage of time, in land use terms, the existing use is playing pitch?
No, I don't dispute that. I just think it's worth knowing the context of where we are with it and the fact it's not been used as a playing pitch for I would say a substantial amount of time. 14 years is a long time, and that if there was any chance of them coming forward as playing pitches, I suggest that would have happened by now.
Mr. Maguire, please.
I think there's probably a couple of items I'd like to pick up on in that previous statement. There are checks and balances in the planning system which secure Sport England's involvement in proposals that affect playing field, and obviously we're a statutory consultee on development upon playing field development that affects playing field and development that might prejudice its use. Now, the term prejudice its use can cover quite a lot of instances, so we would say that while the redevelopment of the college footprint wasn't on playing field, it was confined to the built footprint of the college. That development took away the ancillary facilities that made the playing field function. So the car parking, the changing, the toilets, any storage of sports equipment, that all went with the footprint of the housing. Unfortunately, Sport England wasn't consulted upon that application. So any measures that we might have sought to give the playing field a fighting chance of being able to sustain itself on its own, we didn't have the opportunity to make that argument. I'm also really interested to know what measures Mr. Martin thinks are necessary to the playing field to bring it back into use. I'm not aware of there being any agronomy report which looks at the, you know, how unredeemable it is. Obviously, it's a bit of a shock to go on the site and see horses grazing. I think we've all seen that. But the site is still relatively flat. I'm not sure that there's anything irredeemable about a site like that. I've seen worse brought back into use.
Thank you. I've got no further questions. I wanted to relay, pick up on the first part of paragraph 99 of the National Planning Policy Framework, but I will sort of lean into it perhaps a bit on when we look at paragraph B. So the loss resulting from the proposed development would be replaced by equivalent or better provision, as well as we kind of want to understand about if there is a kind of a quantitative kind of under provision or deficit that's been identified. I mean, this site extends, according to policy GA1, to 5.7 hectares. Is there a view that that encompasses that all of that was former playing pitch provision?
Thank you, sir. To be fair, I don't know the answer to that. If you look back at some of the historic photos of the site on Google, I think often there seems to be 2 pitches marked out on there of various sizes. That's the only information I have in terms of the extent of the pitch use on there. I know obviously there's certain regulations as to what's defined as the pitch and playing area and what isn't, which I'm sure Mr. Maguire knows, but that's all the information I have, unfortunately.
Thank you. Mr. Maguire, please.
I'm really wary of semantics, but the definitions mattered quite a lot to Sport England. So the definition of a playing field is the whole of a site, which includes a playing pitch of 0.2 hectares or more, and it then goes on to list what a playing pitch is, and it's a delineated area which is used for the playing of particular sports, most commonly football, rugby league, hockey, and then it goes on to list about 13 more, which become quite obscure. So, irrespective of how many pitches it laid out, the whole of the site that's allocated was playing field, and it met that definition.
Thank you. So in terms of the approach that's taken with this site allocation, turn to the council and look at the wording of policy GA1 as it currently has been submitted, is to ensure that the playing field loss is mitigated in accordance with policy 37, which is obviously another policy of the plan in relation to open space pitch provision, and the most up-to-date pitch strategy evidence. And I think this is where I want to kind of understand the degree to which there is any kind of consensus on what that kind of mitigation could look like, whether it's feasible, practical, deliverable within the context of this allocation, and whether there's a sense to which, you know, there is a balance somewhere to be struck. If I can turn to the council in the first instance, in terms of having received the playing pitch strategy, what the kind of the council's view is on the kind of the mitigation that could be secured in relation to enabling this site to come forward primarily for housing.
Yes, thank you, sir. and I think as we've set out in our hearing statement, in addition, you know, that mitigation for the loss of the playing field land as identified would comprise retention of and provision of playing field on the land immediately adjacent to the site that we've already discussed in the session this morning, together with a financial contribution to assist in bringing back into use playing pitches which have fallen out of use near to the site elsewhere in the borough, including at the clock as identified in the playing pitch strategy, and or at Hebburn Riverside, and where those mitigation measures would seek to address the reasons why those pitches have fallen out of use, as well as in turn providing both mitigation in quantitative terms by bringing those pitches back into use, and the wider community and sporting benefit that would come from that provision. And we feel that that is effective mitigation for what is being lost as part of the allocation of the site for housing.
Thank you. And in terms of seeking to secure, you say retention of playing pitch, but I'm clear that would be on, at the moment, land outside of the allocation, but adjacent to it, the area we were referring to earlier. I may need some assistance or an action for the council just to help me quantify the extent of that area of land as a hectareage figure, please.
Yes, we can provide that, sir.
I think it's been referred to in some of the material before me, whether there's kind of wider benefits if that area was retained and brought back into an active sport use in terms of the proximity. I was obviously mindful this site is adjacent to St Joseph's Academy. Just invite the council and then others to come in on that point, if that's something I should have in mind as a kind of a material factor.
Yes, I think in our answer to MIQs at 5.117, I think we set out the adjacency of what would be that retained playing pitch to St Joseph's, and where currently there is, as we understand it, high demand for use of the pitches at that school site, both by the school itself and extensive community use and potential overplaying of those pitches, and where an additional pitch adjacent to that school, as set out as mitigation, would assist in addressing those issues at the school currently.
Thank you. I'll bring in Mr. Martin and I'll come to Mr. Maguire, please.
Thank you, sir. It's just to echo what Mr. Inch said, and as I mentioned earlier, we've put a pre-application inquiry in with the council, and as part of that we're also engaging with St Joseph's to see if there could be some wider benefit for them to use that. And the playing pitch strategy does say about how popular those pitches are that are associated with St Joseph's, and that they are used a lot, they have heavy use, and actually this could be of a benefit by adding a further pitch that they might be able to utilise.
Thank you. For Sport England, please, sort of going down here, I think the path of mitigation, just mindful, the NPPF talks specifically about replacing where loss is being considered, whether Sport England understands Sport England's position on the principle of a kind of a package of mitigation that's being outlined. Certain sites are being referred to, the clock, Hebburn Riverside, kind of the legitimacy or the kind of the benefits potentially of that approach, or whether that's, to use shorthand, not going to cut the mustard. And then I'd be interested also for Sport England's view that on what I'm being sort of invited to in terms of the benefit of at least bringing some of this site back into sport provision use, given its proximity to the St Joseph's Academy.
I think the first thing that I need to point out is that in respect of the test at NPPF Para 99B, we don't consider there is actually any quantitative replacement of playing field. And that's very important in respect of the previous distinction I made between the definition of playing field and playing pitches. So there is no quantitative replacement. The sites that have been specified at the Clock, Hebburn Riverside and King George V at Hebburn are all playing field in their own right, albeit they're not currently used. So there is no quantitative element to what the council are proposing in terms of their mitigation package. Now, recent case law, the Maple Durham case, advises Sport England and local authorities how they should approach the test at Para 99B, and that's not as separate elements, so you don't consider if there's no quantitative replacement and there's qualitative replacement, it doesn't instantly fail the test. What that case tells us is that we should consider the two in the round, and Sport England are happy to follow that approach. But obviously we need to be sure that what the council are proposing in respect of any retention at the allocated site, the Clock and the other two sites at the Riverside, the King George V and Hebburn Riverside, offer those qualitative improvements significant enough to outweigh there being no quantitative replacement. And that's where the nub of our disagreement lies, I think. I was listening to the debate around compliance with Greenbelt policy of the retained open space at the allocation with interest this morning, because from our point of view, from Sport England's point of view, we need to be sure that what's retained there is sustainable and functions. It's an attractive proposition for teams to use. Now, I'm not clear in my own mind how that would be done. We've talked with the council about the issues with St Joseph's Academy, and it's clear from aerial photographs and the statistics that we have from the playing pitch strategy that site is overplayed. So when we were looking at the allocated site, there was some interest from football as to whether what was retained could supplement the pitches at St Joseph's. But I'm not clear in my own mind how that would be achieved. The landscaping belt that exists between St Joseph's site and what would be retained is quite substantial. I didn't attempt to try and navigate it when I visited the site. It's particularly because the area of retained playing field at the campus would encounter the most significant extent of that landscape strip. So quite how you link the two without forcing participants to then take a circuitous route through the newly built estate, I'm not quite sure of. So we have concerns about what's retained, and if it can't be linked to the St Joseph campus, then what degree of supporting infrastructure can be provided on site, but still comply with Greenbelt policy in terms of openness? So those doubts exist for me. The Clock playing field is a good size playing field. It's in what appears to be excellent condition, albeit aided by the weather that we're having at the moment. Aerial photographs suggest that it still has a pattern that I associate with supplementary drainage to improve its playability. But it's been out of use for such a long time, and we need to get to the bottom of why that is. And there is no changing provision on site at the moment. There is no parking provision on site there at the moment for teams to use. And what we haven't done is develop any sort of idea as to how we could improve its offer for it to be attractive to team users. And I'm mindful of the fact that if we introduce that development, any parking on there or any change in accommodation, well, we haven't tackled parking, so there's no obvious point of access to the site at the moment, but if we introduce changing accommodation there, then it may be the case that the highways engineers they will want to introduce parking to accommodate team users. So there are significant hurdles there that need to be overcome. So we're not sure of the value of that offer yet. And when I look at the two sites down at the Riverside area, so the Riverside playing field and the King George V field, they are pretty isolated sites. There is some parking provision down there, which is barried off at the moment to allow to stop inappropriate use. But aerial photographs do suggest that it's been subject to some antisocial behaviour. Those sites are frequented as open space, so you have all the attendant problems with that in terms of litter and dog dirt and things like that you really don't want to encounter when you're looking to set up a pitch and participate in sport. And that sort of problem does affect the clock as well, because it's an open area which local residents do see as their open space. So in summary, what's proposed is half baked at the moment, and we can't be sure from Sport England that those problems can be overcome to the extent that they form an offer that's of significant benefit so as to outweigh the quantitative loss. I think there's one further point that I touched upon in my statement, sir, that I want to try and clarify for you. We talked about the figures that we found in the playing pitch strategy in respect of adequacy of provision for football, and there's a fairly common feature that South Tynesyde's playing pitch strategy assessment displays that's pretty common up and down the country, in that the number of adult football teams has declined over the years, whereas there's been significant growth in junior football. Now, what the impact of that is that the adult teams were quite happy with single pitch sites. You know, if you're representing the Dog and Duck, and you only need a pitch every fortnight, whereas the growth that's come about in junior football tends to be club related, and some of the clubs in South Tyneside are of a considerable size. I think Hebburn Town Juniors is probably one of the largest I've come across. Now, those clubs demand and really want to have multi-pitch sites to be able to base age groups on. So that means that as those single pitch sites have become less popular and multi-pitch sites more popular, and what's being offered here in respect of the Hebburn, Riverside and King George V is a sort of fragmentation of provision which runs contrary to the trends in sort of site demand.
Thank you for that. I mean, just from a practical point of view, Mr. Maguire, in terms of thinking about this site, I mean, is it Sport England's position that the starting point would be to retain this site for open space provision and not see any development on this site, or if development is to happen on this site in the way that's proposed in the plan, there should be a straightforward like for like or very similar degree of quantitative replacement, and for that to be provided somewhere else. And I'd be interested to hear Sport England's view on just the practicality within South Tyneside and the demands on land use, how realistic kind of direct replacement would be, again addressing these kind of issues of fragmentation and presumably wanting to keep provision relatively close to clubs, etc., within the Hebburn area.
Well, if we don't demand, we don't operate playing field policy in the way that requires sites are preserved in aspic. We're quite happy to look at replacement provision, provided it meets the policy test in the NPPF. But having said that, I am mindful of the fact that we've talked about the potential benefits that would accrue to the offer at St Joseph's Academy with the retention of some provision at the allocated site. Now, the point was first raised to me by the Football Association that actually that would be significantly better if the whole site was retained, and I have to agree with them, because even in practical terms the ability to create a link between the two is much easier from the northern end of the allocated site than it is from the southern end, which is retained. So I've got to measure that potential against what is put before me from the council in terms of mitigation. At the moment, obviously, we don't have any replacement quantity of playing field, and I think it's been alluded to in statements elsewhere that because of the tightly defined nature of the urban area and the green belt boundary, that actually there aren't a lot of sites that present themselves for that.
Thank you for that. If I can come back to the council on some of the points that have been raised there, I think an area I'm particularly interested in terms of picking up Sport England's position on kind of the effectiveness of the kind of the mitigation that the council's kind of putting forward. I don't know, Mr. Inch or colleagues can just advise me in terms of the clock site and Hebburn Riverside. Are they South Tyneside Council assets? Are they under your control?
Yes, they are, sir. Yeah.
And in terms of securing any kind of package, you mentioned earlier about the ability for potential financial contributions from this site. I'm not clear in my mind yet whether that's sufficient in and of itself, but is there any kind of wider efforts or programme from the council, either through its own resource or collectively, not just through this site but potentially other sites, to kind of bring effect to the ambition, the goal of, bad pun, the intention of bringing the Hebburn Riverside and clock site into kind of more intensive or regular use?
Yeah, in terms of Hebburn Riverside, the council has been working on a master plan for the whole of the Hebburn Riverside area, and that's been consulted upon with the public, and part of the overall master plan is considering how those pitches could be, brought back into use. They're not currently in use, as Mr. Maguire has identified. There are issues associated with antisocial behaviour and some of the issues Mr. Maguire mentioned in terms of how people use them currently, and part of that relates to the fact they're not currently in use for sporting benefit. And as I think we've set out in the Statement of Common Ground with Sport England at paragraph 3.9, a lot of the measures we've mentioned there around tackling unauthorised vehicle use, looking at the tackling drainage of the pitches, all these sorts of measures can really start to look at how those pitches are brought back into use, and for wider sporting benefit. And similarly at the clock, there are ongoing discussions about that site being taken on by a club to look at bringing some of the pitches back into use, but a financial contribution would add significantly to that in terms of tackling some of those measures, perhaps around issues with the pitch and drainage that Mr. Maguire mentioned, potentially changing facilities, those sorts of things. So we feel there's a number of measures that could realistically be implemented and that are already being looked at both of those sites that would assist in bringing them back into use. So I was just also going to add, if I may, just in relation to the retained pitch and its relationship with St Joseph's. Immediately next to the site, as Mr Maguire identifies, there is a landscape buffer, but there wouldn't be, to our mind, any significant reason why a link couldn't be provided partially through the edge of what would be the housing element, and where that would provide a much shorter access through some existing vegetation, where it would connect directly into the school.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, please.
Thank you. Just come back on a few points. I was going to raise something similar there to Mr. Inch, that looking at an aerial view, it's not going to be very difficult to put a path link through to the site. There's a thinner strip in the northern area of the allocation. You could easily punch through a footpath there and have a footpath running down towards the pitch. I don't see that as being a significant barrier in terms of linking St Joseph's and the site. More widely, I think, we're in a situation where we have an authority where land is at a premium for availability for various uses, and yes, in an absolute perfect world, you would find some land somewhere and you could put new pitches on it, and that would be fine. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world, and I think the most appropriate thing to do in this instance is look at pitches that have been in use previously and bring them back into use. And I accept what Mr. Maguire says in terms of there will need to be an exploration as to why they fell out of use, and ensure that what we can provide is something that will make sure that they're longer lasting. And I guess in some way it's not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, I guess, in terms of that cliche saying, because it's in a perfect world you could just get fine land for replacement pitches, but as I said, it's a challenge here. I think the other thing to raise is you could argue that reusing the pitches is bringing pitches back into use is actually a very good beneficial thing to the wider public, rather than if this allocation were to fall away and you would then not get those replacement pitches, or it's highly unlikely you would get those the disused pitches back into use. So there are a number of benefits there. The playing pitch strategy itself does not include the disused pitches, from my understanding, in its sort of quantitative and assessment. Therefore, whilst they are existing pitches being brought back into use, there is clearly some benefit there, because they will add to the overall supply of pitches that are in active use in the borough.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear on that last point, Mr. Martin, so the playing pitch strategy does not take into account kind of Hebburn Riverside as part of the quantitative assessment. Is that what you're saying?
I'd have to check that. No, definitely the clock is not taken into account. The site in question is not taken into account. I'd have to double check on Riverside, but it's certainly not, as far as I'm aware, included as a pitch.
I don't know, Mr. Maguire, if you have a view on that, whether some of the sites we've been talking about are not in the baseline of quantitative provision as part of the playing pitch strategy.
They're not included in the calculations because obviously what it looks at is current supply against current demand. So those disused sites don't currently feature. And what often happens is that in terms of trying to understand how capacity shortages can be tackled, one of those things we call them scenarios. Local authorities are encouraged to look at various scenarios as to how that can be addressed, and a lot of instances it might look at bringing sites back into use and to see what effect that would have.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Mr. Inch, if you're just able to advise me in terms of you referred to various things, including kind of the Hebburn Riverside master plan, etc. Is there a broad sort of time frame as to when that kind of work is likely to output, and is it kind of in broad alignment in terms of when the council thinks this site could come forward? I mean, is it something that's going to be resolved or come to a conclusion in the next year or so?
I don't have a definitive timescale for you on that, sir, I'm afraid. It's clearly something that the council is pursuing, but as in terms of funding for bringing these things forward, obviously that needs to be sought also, but where, the potential for a financial contribution as part of mitigation for this site can clearly assist in bringing that forward.
Mr Maguire?
Yeah, I've seen the term financial contribution mentioned, but I've no idea what that figure might be, what quantum we're talking about, and equally I have no idea of the costs that might be associated with bringing the respective sites at the Clock and Hebburn Riverside into a form that would be attractive to pitch users. I've no idea whether those two are going to match up.
Mr Martin, please.
I think it's for you, sir, to come to a reasoned judgment as well on what you're needing to ensure that this allocation is sound and what can be reasonably addressed through the development management process, and what potentially could be put in this policy to ensure that those the playing pitch mitigation is brought forward in a manner that is appropriate. There is, as I said, I think it's a bit of a balance as to what goes into policy and what is left for the time when the planning application comes in, where things might be a bit more crystallised and a bit clearer.
Thank you. Just sort of drawing this element of the discussion to its conclusion, I think as part of the statement of common ground with Sport England, the council's put forward a modification to replace the word mitigate with replace. I think I've read quite clear from Mr Martin, you don't consider that's necessary for soundness? That the policy should remain as is in terms of mitigating?
We're satisfied with that. The reason being that we felt mitigate was a more appropriate phrase to use in terms of what comes forward as the mitigation for the replacement of the pitches.
Thank you. Now, I mentioned earlier I'm just going to apply myself after sitting here today and hearing the evidence around whether there's a potential modification that brings in a wider site and provides more clarity on the area that's currently greenbelt that's outside of the proposed site allocation. I think there's two things I'd like to leave with the council as part of this is, as indicated earlier, just understanding the size of that remaining parcel of land and being assured that in some way, shape or form it can meaningfully provide some sort of pitch provision, whether that's for junior football. Mr Maguire's also referred to rugby, was it union?
I did, sir, but rugby union pitches tend to be very club-based,
Okay.
and so I think if there is a pitch retained on here, it would be best served as being a football pitch.
Okay. And obviously in terms of that pitch provision, there could be potential ancillary kind of facilities or uses. I mean, I've observed from site visits, double yellow lines on both sides of Wardley Lane, so you can't park near that end of the site. So just thinking about the wider potential land use considerations. So I'd be grateful if the council could provide that information. I'll again, through the programme officer, kind of establish a timeline that we can provide that, have that information provided. And there may need to be some further liaison with Pegasus Bellway in terms of what that could look like. Second thing I'm going to sort of have an eye on, not now necessarily for today, but we're going to come on to as part of stage 2 around just general infrastructure planning. And if there is, as a result of the plain pitch strategy, a quantitative shortfall, potential measures to address that. I will, after this session, be tracking through further whether there's anything in the infrastructure delivery plan at this current stage, and then there might well be an MIQ in due course about whether that's something to think about in terms of delivering quantitative or qualitative improvements to open space plain pitch provision. So I just flag that up now. And I'll also apply myself in terms of whether thinking about potential modifications to this policy, whether in terms of providing further detail, if there was a wider site around the type and location of open space plain pitch provision, the necessity of having something in the policy about a link or providing some form of link from St Joseph's Academy through the site in terms of how that's configured and laid out. Okay. Thank you for those contributions. That's certainly assisted me on this matter, but I'm going to go on to I could have generally picked up representations from Sport England on my agenda. I think Mr Maguire, hopefully we've kind of through the various kind of discussions to date, picked up your organisation's kind of soundness concerns with what's being proposed here. I think, is there anything further you wish to add?
I think the point that I'd want to make is it's very well arguing that we can address some of the issues around the replacement sites along the line, and I think my concern is that issues get picked up in respect to those sites or difficulties occur, which mean that they can't come forward in the way that they're envisaged, or they're severely compromised in the likely benefit that it will have for sport. So at the moment, I don't have the comfort to be able to make the judgment that playing field policy would be met. And if that's the case, I've got to question whether the actual allocation is one that should be pursued in its current form, or it should be tied so heavily or tightly to replacement provision of a particular specification that we have that comfort that we need.
Thank you. I'll now move on to the fourth and sort of final item of the agenda for this particular site before we take a mid-morning adjournment. And obviously this is a site that's allocated to achieve around about 115 dwellings. It's identified as an indicative capacity, so it could be slightly more, slightly less. And whether the evidence in terms of everything else that the site needs to provide, there is the kind of the assurance that that site can deliver 115 units, and I've referred to the site's framework evidence that's before me. If I can give the council the first opportunity on this, and then undoubtedly bring in Mr Martin for his perspective.
Yeah, so the standard net developable area and density assumptions that we touched on yesterday for that site would give a slightly lower yield of 90 dwellings, but given the location of the site, the accessibility, and there's a bus stop just over the road, it's obviously just next to the school, and the character of the surrounding area, I think we think that slightly higher yield of 115 is reasonable. The site frameworks document, as well as the indicative layout that Bellway have provided, show that can be reasonably accommodated on the site, while also incorporating the key considerations from policy SP7.
Thank you, Mr Martin, in terms of the capacity that's identified for this site and its potential kind of assist me in terms of my future deliberations around delivery of sites as well, when the site could potentially come forward were this plan to be found sound in its current form.
Thank you, sir. In terms of the quantum, I'd agree with the council, and you'll see we've provided two layouts actually, both of which show 115 units can be accommodated on site. The site benefits somewhat by the fact that that southern bit would remain as playing pitch, landscape, etc. So there are, and we've assumed as well a little bit in the north for a suds feature as well, which has been sized appropriately. So we're quite comfortable that a figure of around 115 should be, or could be accommodated on there. We would always urge the number to be around or circa, just because it may be that for whatever reason it might not be exactly 115 in its final form. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less, but it's, you know, so that seems to me to be a sensible way forward, rather than having an absolute figure or a minimum figure or anything like that. I think the statement of common ground that we signed in terms of timescales, I think we've mentioned about 3 years to develop it out should it be allocated. We put the pre-app in already, trying to steal a little bit of a march if you were minded to allocate it. So my client is chomping at the bit to use a phrase to get on and put a planning application in and get development going. They've built the development to the north. That's been in for a while. This would almost be like a second phase to that development. It joins up nicely with it. It punches through. As I said, there's no ransom strips or anything like that. Maybe to give you a little bit more of assurance that a 3-year build period is doable. It was about a 3-year build period for the development to the north, and it's of a similar quantum.
Thank you. Now, I can't help but remember yesterday, I don't know which hat you were wearing, but others were making a similar point around, you know, there's a potential issue going forward around biodiversity net gain impacting on site capacity and yields. Is that something I need to bear in mind about the realism of 115 units on this site?
In this instance, I would say no, because you are dealing with a site that has a generous bit of land to the south that I feel you could probably do some work on there in terms of biodiversity net gain. Of course, it depends on what the baseline surveys come back with, but my view is it's sort of that sort of grassland, I think, would be what you would mainly be losing on the site, and I don't see that as being difficult habitat in terms of the trading rules to replicate on the site, on the area below, and improve upon. So I don't see it necessarily in this instance as being a particularly difficult constraint to overcome.
Thank you. I wonder if Mr. Maguire's gone where my mind has gone.
Possibly so. I think the sort of biodiversity net gain measures that have to be implemented on site sometimes causes problems in terms of the management and maintenance that you need to establish a suitable playing surface for sports. They're not the same thing. And again, it's another of those issues where I feel a squeeze in the area that might be utilised for the setting out of pitches.
Thank you. That was what I was thinking. I think as part of my request to the council when understanding that area to the south, I've indicated around, you know, its ability to provide playing pitch strategy, but I'm also hearing it's could have a multifunctional purpose and potentially provide for a multitude of purposes to enable this site to come forward. Mr. Martin.
Yes, I mean, you'll be aware that, and it was mentioned and picked up yesterday, that the current form of the statutory metric requires us to look sequentially to provide on-site in the first instance. So I would suggest, whilst there are other uses there, we can do what we're able to do and maximise biodiversity net gain sensibly in that area. If there's more that's needed in terms of getting to that 10%, there would be the other routes to go down in terms of habitat bank and statutory credit. So again, it's not I think that the way that the current legislation set out, it's built in so it doesn't become an issue that makes development impossible. If you've got the sufficient funds to do it, then you can always go off site. And I would say, I'm representing a national house builder who has plenty of resources to be able to do that.
Thank you, but nonetheless you've submitted a letter as part of the statement of common ground around general viability considerations. We'll come on to that in more detail at stage 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes, but on this site I'm assured that it is viable. It's been costed. As I said, Bellway are a national house builder. In fact, they have their own biodiversity net gain people in-house to deal with this. They have the expertise. And yes, as I said, I'm confident in my mind that they can address biodiversity net gain in a viable way.
Thank you. It's coming up to, I think it is 11 o'clock now, so we're on time. I'm going to take a mid-morning adjournment. Before I move away, as I've indicated, there's some things I want the council to assist and look into. Is there anything else from the council's perspective you want me to take into account in relation to site GA1 and the agenda this morning? No. Okay then, right, we'll take mid-morning adjournments. Thank you everybody for your contributions this morning on site GA1. We'll reconvene back in this room at 11:15 and we're going to be talking about site SP14, Wardley, Colliery. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 11:15, so I'll resume these examination hearings. We're now picking up matter 5, issue 7, which is the Wardley Colliery proposal in the plan to be found at policy SP14 as a strategic allocation for employment uses. I think similarly to how I dealt with the Hebburn site, I think I'd like to start, as you see from my agenda, first looking at perhaps the more localised considerations in terms of demonstrating exceptional circumstances for this particular greenbelt alteration and the extent of the alteration, before moving on to look at transport considerations, sustainable transport choices, and then finally just how the proposed allocation sits in relation to the adjacent Wardley Colliery local wildlife site. So I'd like to invite the Council in the first instance. I think it's really in response to my MIQs 5.70 and 5.71. So just specifically as we drill down to this particular site, how the Greenbelt Review process has considered and assessed it, and what kind of compensatory improvements or mitigations were identified. Is it Mr. Clifford?
Thank you, sir. So the Greenbelt study considered the site, and purposes 1, 2 and 3 were assessed as being moderate, purpose 4 low in terms of the harm. So the highest harm rating was moderate. As I think we'll come to the broader area, which includes the wildlife site, the harm rating was higher, but specifically the site that we've allocated, the overall harm rating was moderate. In fact, the highest harm rating was moderate. So the Council considers that Policy SP14 reflects Appendix C of the Greenbelt study in terms of potential mitigation and enhancement measures, and those that have been incorporated into Policy SP14 are referenced within the policy, ensure that adverse ecological impacts are dealt with through the mitigation hierarchy and are delivered within the Wardley Colliery wildlife site, and include compensatory improvements to the environmental quality of remaining greenbelt land to offset the impact of the removal of the land from the greenbelt. However, the Council would be prepared to consider further modifications or modifications to Policy SP14 to reflect the specific mitigation measures in the Greenbelt study, should you feel that that were necessary. And in terms of ecology, I think that might be something we come to subsequently, but obviously the Council has been mindful of the proximity of the local wildlife site in terms of determining the boundary as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Clifford. And in terms of paragraph, it's 5293 of the Council's Matter 5 statement. The Council's not at this stage suggesting that there is a potential potential modification. Is it just effectively opening the door that were I to arrive at a...
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. I should have started at the start of this session. I've just looked up and realised there are new faces on the Council's team. Perhaps if I can just very briefly invite them to introduce themselves, just for my benefit and others watching around the table. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. My name is Trevor Mail. I am the Strategic Transport Lead at South Tyneside Council.
I'm Claire Rawcliffe. I'm the Natural Environment Manager at South Tyneside Council.
Thank you. That's helpful. In terms of the overall approach to the Greenbelt, I've obviously got various representations before me. I don't think anybody's here specifically making them, and we kind of discussed them when we were looking at the employment needs back on day one in terms of the exceptional circumstances to be considering Greenbelt release in principle for employment uses, and specifically at the Wardley Colliery site. Mr. Wood, on behalf of your client, I don't think I read anywhere that you dispute necessarily the findings of the Greenbelt Reviews study and the kind of compensatory improvements that have been identified.
Yes, sir, that's right. Really our only issue was around the actual boundary, as we'd raised, regarding the finer detail. I think you referred to it of the parcels, specifically with reference to FO2 and the land at the north. So, but in terms of the assessment of the allocated site, yes, we'd endorse what the councillors said.
Thank you. And in terms of the Greenbelt Review study coming to its various conclusions and thinking about exceptional circumstances and alterations to the Greenbelt, the National Planning Policy Framework says where you are going to alter the Greenbelt, particularly sort of give consideration to previously developed land and or sites that are well served by public transport. I take it there's no dispute that the area that the council has identified under policy SP14 can reasonably be considered as previously developed land?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, we certainly feel that's the case. It was extensively previously used and developed as part of the coal handling and disposal facilities, which were only relatively recently demolished, and all of the hard standings and concrete areas remain from that. So I don't think there's any tension with the definition of PDL. And interesting, just as you touched on earlier, potentially it slightly evolved into the grey belt situation now as well, which obviously wasn't there originally at the time of the drafting of the plan. But that's a current NPPF matter.
Thank you. Just to come back to this point I referred to a moment ago, Mr. Clifford, in terms of the council saying around a potential or prepared to consider a potential modification. I appreciate the policy SP14 obviously includes the criteria around including compensatory improvements. Obviously other policies of the plan have a bit more kind of detail or set out in more detail what those could be. Is that something that I think that I should be just considering or thinking whether that final point 3 of the policy is sufficient or whether there needs to be further detail drawing on the Greenbelt Review evidence?
Can I come back to you on that?
Yeah. Thank you. And then just again, I'm mindful, Mr. Wood, you weren't here for the employment needs session when we looked sort of more widely at what the plan is seeking to address. It's obviously going for the, I'm going to describe it as kind of the most positive scenario in terms of employment land needs, in terms of capitalising on benefits from the International Advanced Manufacturing Park. The policy itself identifies the site as meeting general economic development needs. I think the council, they can correct me if I'm wrong on this, at previous sessions has seen a specific, or seen a potential of this site to meet B2 uses. Is that correct, Mr. Clifford?
B2 and B8.
Yeah. I just wonder whether, either from the council or from Mr. Wood, in terms of just understanding the ability and the attractiveness of this particular location to meet some of those particular needs. So Mr. Clifford first, thank you.
Well, firstly, I'll point out that through the Employment Land Review, it's identified that future performance of general industrial sectors B2 is expected to outstrip past trends by considerable margin, so we think there's the demand there. In terms of the advantages offered by the site, there's quite a number of advantages. I mean, first and foremost, I would say its proximity to the strategic road network. I think that's a key advantage. There's a number of other advantages in terms of, for example, I think it's something we'll come on to, but in terms of its linking to broader agendas with the reopening of the Leenside line and the Follingsby station. So in terms of sustainable travel, it links. It's also got proximity to the IAMP, and whilst proximity to the IAMP isn't a sort of absolute precondition for a company in the supply chain to, in terms of locational requirements, it can be an advantage, and clearly it is quite close to the IAMP. So there's an opportunity there. So we feel, taken in the round, when you look at all of the factors in relation to the site, the fact it's a well-screened brownfield site, the fact it's very close to an area of the strategic road network where there's quite a sort of juxtaposition of various junctions, its proximity to the IAMP, and also its linking into that broader agenda, as has been, announced with the Northeast funding situation in the mayoral announcement that there will be support for the reopening of the Leenside line, and there's a commitment to Follingsby station being delivered as part of that. So we feel we've taken a cumulative view, if you like, and that exceptional circumstances have, cumulatively speaking, been demonstrated.
Thank you. Mr. Wood, please.
Yes, as regards the evidence base, I think what came out clearly from the Employment Land Review was the location issue of provision of land within the borough, and the focus on the southwest of the area, which obviously there isn't a large amount of land available, which is where Wardley contributes. In terms of the uses, certainly B2 and B8, I tend to feel potentially light industrial as well. There's nothing precludes that, and there's no constraints on it as regards any residential receptors or anything, so it's something of a blank sheet in terms of what can go on there, but probably not office development given its context. In terms of just the day-to-day, shall we say, and the reality of it, I think we referred to it in our MIQ as an update. Our clients originally bought this for their own purposes to develop a block production plant on. For various reasons, delays, delays with the plan and also changes in the market, that's not now taking place. The site hasn't been formally brought to the market as yet, largely because of the catch-22 position we're in as regards the greenbelt status. What I can say to the examination is that the people that will be tasked with marketing have had informal discussions and approaches about the site, but at the moment it's very speculative because of the uncertain planning situation. There is certainly interest, and everybody looking at it has said it's a fantastic location because of many of the features that Mr. Clifford's referred to. And the prospect of the metro station is also being mentioned when people look at it. The difficulty at the moment is it's only a speculative investor that can take it forward because of the uncertainty. What's also been mentioned is that the estate people that are looking to market have had approaches from existing South Tyneside occupiers who would like to expand their premises but can't find anywhere, and therefore are potentially having to look to Gateshead or Sunderland or further afield. So there seems to be certainly real world evidence as well, notwithstanding it's not formally marketed, that there is interest in the site and a demand.
I think I mentioned for the Hebburn site, I mean, that's a site I've clearly been able to see from various kind of public vantage points. Unfortunately, this isn't a site I've yet been able to get to. That's something I may need to kind of discuss how that can practicably be arranged or accommodated, or whether I should just ignore the signs at the entrance to the site that say it's private land. I wasn't comfortable doing that. But I understand, Mr. Wood, I mean, this is a location where there are already some existing activities. We're not dealing wholly exclusively with an undeveloped site. There are things there already.
Yes, I mean, there's two aspects to it. There's the permanent development of the AD plant at the south of the site, which does obviously occupy some of the land. There is part of the allocation, as was, but it's actually now out with it, of the retained land for the potential metro station. At the north of the site, there's the container sales area, who are tenants and whose lease will finish within the planned period. And I think you'd have seen on our statement of common ground there was an asterisk next to the available land. That was reflecting the fact that as it stands now, there is, I think it was referred to as just over 6 hectares available, but there is another 2 or 3 at the end of that lease from the container site. So it then becomes a wider parcel. So there's the permanent fixed elements and the we'll call it safeguarded land for the metro station at the bottom, but north of that there's an immediate availability and then a slightly longer term availability within the plan period.
Thank you for that. So in terms of what's being proposed at the Wardley Colliery site and the extent of the proposed allocation, if I can just clarify with the council first, and then I'll come to Mr. Wood and your position in terms of potential modifications to the plan. So SP14, as I understand it, would effectively identify the whole and kind of wider site at 12.7 hectares. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct. It identifies the whole of what you might term as the footprint of the existing broad area that's in use.
Thank you. And then in terms of the balance that's kind of being considered available for kind of future employment needs, is the council's position that that figure is the 6.71 hectares?
In terms of how that position was determined, table 16 in the employment land technical paper. You have two parcels which are P4A and P4B. P4A is the western parcel of the former Wardley Colliery coal disposal point, and P4B is the eastern parcel. On the advice of the agent, Mr. Wood, we also added an additional plot to the north of P4A, which was identifying additional land that is also available for development. And according to our map info, at any rate, when you add that together, you get 6.71 hectares.
And in terms of that figure being asterisked in the statement of common ground, is that a reflection that the council would take the existing kind of container use business as being an existing employment use, so therefore if it comes available and kind of gets recycled again for employment, it's not a net additionality, so that what's kind of in effect new or would be net new employment land through this plan would be the 6.71 hectares.
I think in order to give you a definitive answer, we would need to look at the site again, because as I say, I do have this note that the agent representing Walker, the company that owns the site, identified additional land. So I'd have to make sure that that wasn't the same area which Mr. Wood has referenced. So I don't know, it might be need a sort of teams meeting between myself and Mr. Wood to just make absolutely sure we're talking about exactly the same piece of land, because obviously somehow we're coming to different views about the available area. It's probably a simple explanation, but I don't know what it is at the moment.
So the point I think you're making is whether or not the 6.71, if that is the correct figure, makes allowance for, i.e. doesn't include existing employment uses such as the anaerobic digester and container storage.
Yeah, I was wondering whether once you, as you say, Mr. Shadowraven, once you net off the AD and the container, the residual you're left with, the net new 6.71
so
hectares.
That's the first point. We need to confirm.
Just, yeah.
Second point is whether that is the correct figure.
Yep.
So I can confirm it's net of the anaerobic digester.
Yep.
You know, it's what we considered to be land that is available for development as such.
We'll confirm that.
Thank you. Is there anything further, Mr. Wood, you want to say on this particular point in terms of what net availability?
I think it's actually paragraph 5.70 in the policy text. So that refers to the total area of 12.7, and it says the available area, i.e. the net of existing development, close brackets, is 6.71 hectares, and open brackets. This makes allowance for the area used for container storage and the anaerobic digester that has been built. So it's discounting both of those as far as I can see.
But I think, just so I'm clear on your position for your client, you think that figure should be higher because the container units are potentially there on a temporary lease basis?
Yeah, we're flagging it because within the planned period that becomes available.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's yeah, understood, yeah. Thank you. And then I can understand from Mr. Wood, obviously the council's seeking to make a positive allocation here in terms of altering the green belt. I think, as you've indicated, at the moment its green belt status is creating some uncertainty for investment at the site. But I think you're seeking a modification that the site should be more widely drawn to include a wider area at this former colliery disposal site. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, sir. I mean, the there's obviously two aspects to this. There's the green belt and the ecology stroke local wildlife side. Our starting point in representations was the green belt study. And it comes back to an issue I think you touched on yesterday about where do you stop on the size of units and things, which I fully appreciate. The difficulty we had in terms of the green belt assessment was the characterisation of land parcel FO2 within the green belt study, which very much lumped everything together and ignored what we thought was quite a distinct parcel of land at the north, which in characteristic terms, not least topography, was more akin to the site to be allocated and the land being considered for that. And really, it was more a case of we felt it was a missed opportunity, given that the evidence was pointing to the need and demand for some of the things we've discussed this morning. It's tricky without you having been on site, because it's one of those that is more apparent when you see it. But if you go to the assessment of FO2 within the green belt assessment and the consideration of harm, which ultimately led to the categorisation of harm for each purpose. I don't propose to go through all that, but the consistent thing that comes out within the description, the assessment under purpose 1, 2 and 3, you'll see halfway down in most of them there's a specific reference to the release of the high ground within the parcel would exert, for example, a significant urbanising influence, and then it refers to the visibility of the parcel as well. The issue that we've always had is that this has ignored the detail of the site and not least the topography. Aerial images that you can see within the Greenbelt study clearly show the area that we refer to. And it's so distinct, we've felt there is a flaw in the Greenbelt assessment that it's been overlooked from the outset and held to be damaging to the Greenbelt in a way that lumps it in unreasonably with the high ground. We have no issue with the characterisation of the high spoil heap and the contribution it makes. But when we're looking at the green belt and the assessment and things like boundaries that we referred to earlier and yesterday, this in terms of topography alone is so distinct from the high ground that I think it demanded a more refined, finer grain assessment. So that was our issue with the green belt. Our submission, as you've seen in the MIQs, we suggest it's got a much lower contribution and harm to the green belt because of the topography. It's enclosed to the south and to the east by higher ground, so it has these defensible boundaries, as well as a very defined boundary along its north edge, including a watercourse. There isn't actually a material boundary between it and the land to the east and the current area occupied by the container sales site. So that was our issue, the missed opportunity, effectively.
Thank you. So in terms of, I mean, obviously Mr. Cliff has taken us through what the Greenbelt Review study said in relation to parcel FO1, which relates to the proposed allocation. Is your submission, Mr. Wood, that this part of FO2 is comparable to FO1 or performs better?
I think it's more comparable to FO1 than actually FO2 that it's been lumped in with.
Thank you. And also in terms of exceptional circumstances, I'm mindful we're kind of maybe raking over matters we've discussed at previous sessions. Under the Council's employment land scenario that it's chosen as indicated the most positive of the 5 scenarios that were looked at, identified the amount of employment land to meet that. Existing employment land sites pretty much get the Council to that position, but it's taken the view that there are the exceptional circumstances to put in the Wardley what's currently proposed as the Wardley colliery site provides, one could argue, degree of headroom, buffer, flexibility in supply for unanticipated circumstances. It's whether the exceptional circumstances exist to then sort of go further, because what's the sort of size of the sort of land we're talking about in terms of the additional area that you suggest would need to be included through a further alteration to the green belt?
The area, 3.7 hectares in total. I think it comes back to the location and the sustainability of the site. Opportunities of a site with a metro station adjacent to it. It's fairly unique, so that's where it feeds into the exceptional test.
Thank you. We'll come on to other issues in relation to the site and boundaries, I think, in due course. Just, Thank you. I'll probably pick up the council's suggested modification around site boundary, probably under item 8 of the agenda. It's appendix 2 to the statement of common ground, but I'll come back to that once we've discussed the local wildlife site issue. Thank you for those. I'm clear in my mind the respective submissions in relation to the approach to Greenbelt boundaries. I'd just like to move on to item 6 on my agenda in terms of impact on the wider highway network. As Mr. Clifford's already referred to, one of the potential advantages of this location for employment uses is its relationship to the strategic road network. And I'm mindful, was it Mr. Finch? National Highways assets are not too far from here. I think in terms of you have responsibility for the A194M and also, is it parts of the A184?
The trunk road heads up the motorway and then it goes right towards Testo's roundabout. So it's a strange location where the strategic road network actually gives way to the local road network.
And in terms of how this site would be accessed from the kind of the highway network, presumably the access is in the first instance from Follingsbury Lane.
Yes, sir, I think that's correct.
And then in terms of its relationship to the strategic road network would be the clearer way of connection be to the A194M. I don't know if there's a specific name for that junction. Is it known as the Follingsbury? Because this isn't a site that would directly connect to Whitemare Pool Junction.
No, we would expect it to come through the Follingsbury junction. There is a problem with the North East that they have several names for junctions, so it will could be known by different names by different parties. But yes, I would refer to it as the Follingsbury junction.
And from all my reading of the kind of the evidence, Mr. Finch, that in general terms, and I appreciate National Highways submitted a statement that has been accepted into the examination. You've also provided an evidence pack that sits alongside that. I hadn't read anywhere within that material that National Highways, having considered all the various evidence that the council's produced, has a concern in terms of the impact on the performance and safety of the strategic road network arising from this particular plan proposal?
Yes, that's correct, sir. I mean, we didn't review this site individually. We referred to the council's. We looked at it as an overall assessment, and we covered it under council's policies for 26 and 59. The cumulative impact, much work has been done to undertake cumulative impact assessment. we've identified 2 major points of improvement on the strategic road network that have been agreed with the council, and we're happy to support their local plan. We think the suitable evidence being provided for this stage of the plan making process.
Thank you. And I noted as part of the evidence pack, Mr. Finch, that obviously that covers a number of junctions, you say various names, which I'm probably going to get very familiar with over the course of this examination. But Follingsbury wasn't one of them. Is that a junction that is of concern?
There were two areas of improvement required. Whitemare Pool probably being the main one, where we've identified either a larger or currently discussing interim improvements, so delivery of that larger scheme through a phased process, but also a lane gain, lane drop on the A19 southbound. They're the 2 main big ticket items that perhaps you would associate them with. It doesn't mean we might need some minor improvements, but which will be picked up at when a detailed transport assessment comes forward as part of a planning application. This might be tweaking. However, at this stage of the plan making process, we felt there was suitable evidence provided to support the council's plan.
Thank you. A note from the Statement of Common Ground that National Highways entered into with the with South Tyneside Council and picked up again in the Statement of Common Ground with Mr. Wood and his company, a proposed main modification to put in some additional policy content within policy SP14 about ensuring that there would be no unacceptable impacts on highway safety, including mitigating the impact on the Whitemare Pool junction. Is that considered necessary for soundness?
I'd just like to stress that it's a cumulative impact of all these developments that causes concern. Without, subject to scale and location, it's difficult to say when these improvements are required. That work is currently ongoing in negotiations with the council. We originally assessed it with very robust figures, and then policy changed. I'm sure you read it sooner than I did, sir, but it came out on the 23rd of December, so I didn't pick it up until the following year, 2023, which helps us try and provide a more vision-led approach to reduce the trip generation on the network. We are working with the council now looking at revised numbers, but they were only submitted last Monday. But by the time you come back after the summer recess, we hopefully will have updated the Statement of Common Ground.
DFT Circular 1 of 22. It's ingrained from various plan examinations. It's becoming increasingly referenced, and obviously it's made its way through to the latest MPPF, but obviously I'm still very much in. I know, yeah. So it sounds to me, we'll come on to this, I think it's part of other discussions. It seems to me, just to make this as a general observation, the transport work to date, can it be described as looking at kind of like the worst case scenario, and if vision-led work can only kind of hopefully lead?
I would describe it as robust, sir. A robust set of figures to, and then we will now, we've also moved on since the original joint work. The Council and National Highways have worked together very closely to identify what mitigation is required, including joint studies between the authority and National Highways. We will be looking to amend that, which will hopefully reduce the number of trips and the impact on the network in light of the circular.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it's referenced in the Statement of Common Ground, Mr. Wood, in terms of proposed modification. Is that something from your perspective or your client's perspective you have any objection or concern about? Are you accepting that as a...
Yeah, I think it's slightly difficult without knowing any potential occupier and the scale of things, but it's not, I don't think it's unreasonable given the issues present. I'm not gonna...
And obviously any proposal that comes forward would be subject to its own transport assessment in due course, yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, the proposed main modification is noted, and obviously through further reflection, I'll give a council a steer on whether I consider that's necessary for soundness. If I can move on then in terms of the agenda, and again looking at kind of exceptional circumstances around greenbelt releases, the National Planning Policy Framework says, obviously once you've kind of got to the point of there is a need, and you need to kind of be considering alterations to the greenbelt to kind of give a particular focus to sites that have previously developed land, which I think everybody's saying in this case, yes, tick, and or that are well served by public transport. I think this is obviously in the south and west of the administrative area. I think the council's been sort of quite honest and straightforward in terms of its matters, issues and questions to kind of think reflect that this is a potential issue, but it's one that's going to be looked at, and that there are potential opportunities to kind of enhance the accessibility of the site. I think Mr. Clifford's referred to some of them already, but I don't know if it would be Mr. Mail or Mr. Clifford in terms of, I'm already starting to hear through this examination around the Leamside or the Washington Loop, where things are with that in terms of its likely time frame, progress, and any other measures at this location where alternatives to the car could be encouraged or supported, please.
Thanks, sir. Yes, in terms of the Washington Loop project, it's been recently identified as part of the North East Mayoral deal. Basically, we've secured regionally investment through city regional funding of 1.85 billion from the period of 2027 to 2032, and the Mayor has identified the Washington Loop project, which is using in part of the Leamside Line corridor. It will have metro stations at Follinsby, at Washington South and North, and then the connection back to the South Hilton existing metro line. The Mayor has actually awarded £900 million direct from that 1.85 billion allocation, and there is numerous work streams being advanced by the North East Combined Authority around assessing and appraising that coming forward for hopeful construction from 2027. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just be clear when you say there's 900 million kind of directly being sort of drawn down now? Is that exclusively for this project, or is it for a variety of transport projects, and this would be one of those?
So it's 900 million out of the 1.85 billion. So the Mayor has actually gone on record to cite that the Washington Loop will be a firm project that she wants to deliver as part of that respective deal. And I believe it's in the representations from the actual client, the private client representing the site itself.
Thank you. And just to clarify my note, Mr. Mayor, with anticipated construction by possibly by 2027?
Yep, I think that's the funding window from 2027 to 2032, but obviously in terms of the Washington Loop project, there are a number of potential constraints to mitigate, the Washington Viaduct being, the Victoria Viaduct, sorry, being a key aspect. Nonetheless, it's a project that's being managed by the North East Combined Authority.
And then just more widely, I don't know if it's Mr. Clifford or Mr. Mail. I don't know, Mr. Clifford, do you want to add anything further on that?
Sir? Could I just add that we do have a policy for safeguarding land for metro stations, and that has identified the site within that policy. So there is policy support as well specifically for that.
Thank you for that. And then just more widely, obviously Metro is one opportunity. Are there any other, I don't know where the nearest bus stops are likely to be?
So I can answer that, sir. So the nearest bus stop is from the northern element of the site. There is a bus stop within 400 metres, but then obviously from the eastern boundary, there is a bus stop close to the Amazon sort of storage, Amazon warehouse, sorry, on Follansby Lane. I think it acts as the terminus for the actual bus service. It then reordered itself to Heworth as a form of interchange, but it is accessible via public transport. And I think just in addition to that, obviously from a council perspective, we also would like to see a desire of active travel being promoted. There's been a lot of investment by National Highways to the immediate east of the development in terms of the downhill and Testo junctions, which for all were major junction improvements. There was a significant amount of active travel improvements built into that, so we firmly see there's a real connectivity between this respective site and the east to west movements along Follansby Lane, which can be promoted as an active travel corridor. And I believe it's suitably identified in the infrastructure delivery plan as well.
Thank you. If I could bring in Mr. Wood in terms of the accessibility, the ability to kind of secure modal shift at this location.
Yeah, thank you. It was really just a point of clarification to confirm that our clients do have land ownership, which includes a secondary highway access to the north. You can see the railway line runs up towards Whitemare Pool roundabout. There is actually a highway access that accesses the site from there, which has always been discounted because of the issues up there. But in terms of accessibility to things like the bus stops and things, there is a route within the ownership of and control of the landowners that does get you there.
And does that kind of ultimately connect out onto the A184 from that northern?
Yeah, somebody with better knowledge might correct me here, but I think it accesses out by it does, I've driven it, by the terrace of houses which sits immediately by the roundabout.
Thank you. From earlier, was additional point, Mr. Clifford?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Apologies.
That's okay. Thank you for that. I've got nothing further I wanted to raise today in relation to sustainable transport choices. That's helpful in terms of just a bit more detail on the metro, potential metro extension situation. And then finally for today's session is just understanding around ecology and the relationship of the Wardley, relationship of this site to the Wardley Colliery local wildlife site. I think I'll invite the council in the first instance in terms of what's potentially changed here in terms of more recent kind of survey or assessment work. And I think the council's through the statement of common ground with the site owner promoter is looking to make a revision to the mapping to kind of reflect the extent of the local wildlife site.
Thank you. So my understanding is the local wildlife site was originally designated back in around 2009, 2010. And we've been aware through various planning applications since that the boundary probably didn't beautifully match where the development or previous development on site was and where the ecological interest was. So with the agreement of the landowner, we had a survey undertaken in 2020 by Haycock and J Associates, which is post sub 13, I believe. And the primary purpose of that was to get a detailed map of the ecological interest of the site, primarily the botanical interest. We didn't go into species. To understand the location of the habitats that would meet the criteria for local wildlife site designation. And we're in a state of flux in our local wildlife site partnership, so we had them test it against the standing criteria and some sort of well-developed draft future criteria, and it was tested against both of those. And on the back of that, that report recommended a slightly amended boundary to take account of where the ecological features are. And my understanding is the allocation is proposed to meet that new boundary.
And you're able to advise, Ms. Rawcliffe, is there a kind of a separate process that kind of endorses revisions to local wildlife sites? Is that something that has been undertaken in this case in light of, if you say, that updated survey work?
So local wildlife sites are designated by local sites partnerships. It's not, although local wildlife sites have a guidance document about how to do it from DEFRA, there isn't actually a formal sign-off procedure within that. So each local wildlife site partnership kind of works its way through that, and it's an unusual process because you do need the landowners have to be informed, and it goes through a process between the sites partnership, and then effectively the sites partnership tell the respective local authority of their decision, and then maps get updated to that effect. It's criteria based, so technically if land meets the criteria, it ought to be designated. It's not supposed to be a decision based on how convenient or otherwise a designation would be.
So maybe it's just the end of a long week. I just need to be clear in my mind. Has that happened here then, in terms of the partnership has looked at this and there's a kind of an agreement that the local wildlife site is not as extensive as originally designated in 2009?
Sorry, no, the local wildlife site partnership haven't yet met to discuss this particular site, but it will be on the future agenda.
Okay, but in terms of what's being put to me as part of this local plan proposal, it's always an interesting one. I don't have formally the ability to kind of modify or recommend modifications to the policies map, but it does get kind of enveloped within my reporting process. Obviously the council, through the statement of common ground, is, I think, suggesting a proposed modification to the policies map. If that goes forward, does it have any bearing or any impact on the extent of the proposed allocation, or is it merely just a reflection of what I'm hearing in terms of the ecological evidence? It's not extending the area or boundary of the proposed allocation. Just means, I think it means less of the proposed allocation would be within a local wildlife site.
Which will be ascertainable from the proposals map.
So I don't need to worry that 12.7 has become 13.5.
No, you would have to worry if it were the other way around, but it's not.
And more widely, in terms of the relationship of this site to the local wildlife sites, obviously it is of concern to some people through the representations on the Regulation 19 plan, how that site is managed and what could potentially go on the Wardley Colliery site, and whether that could be harmful to the value and features of the wildlife site. As I understand it from the evidence, this is a habitat that's kind of emerged and evolved really as a response to the former industrial use and activities. I think, Mr. Wood, you say in your representations and submissions there could be a potential benefit here in terms of what could be. I appreciate it's not being encouraged or but sort of unauthorised kind of access and activity at this location.
Yes, thank you. I'm not an ecologist, so bear with me, but I think the kind of unique nature of this type of site and other ones we deal with doing minerals and things is that the emerging brownfield status of it as grassland or whatever is transitory, for want of a better word. It comes about because of the recent cessation of use, but it's only to my understanding, a period of time before it moves on to something else. And obviously LWS is largely based on this emerging brownfield thing. So there is a longer term question about what the status and value of the site is, which demands management in effect. In looking at this, I was actually looking at one of the wildlife groups' advice on it, and the description was emerging brownfield land is successional habitat, which is the first stage in habitat's journey towards forest and things. And another site refers to the need to manage it to prevent site succession to woodland or scrub and the loss of the habitats. So this is the slight issue we've got in terms of that you need to do something with it to almost maintain the quality. And actually it was striking when I went there more recently for the photos for the MIQs, how much it's evolved in terms of things like pioneer species of silver birch colonising it and things. So it needs some sort of intervention, and I think that's recognised in the mitigation for greenbelt extension as one of the steps in it. There's a recognition that it needs management. On top of that, you have this unauthorised use of scramble bikes, off-roading. I think we showed a photograph of an informal camp that somebody had built recently. So there is this problem of how you resolve stopping activity, maintaining the habitat, and it's quite a difficult thing, this emerging brownfield that Mr. Brooke probably advise better, but that's where we were coming from, that ownership almost gives that benefit, some sort of investment opportunity as well.
I want to look at the statement of common ground, Mr. Wood, and the kind of the mapping. So the area that you're suggesting could be a sort of a further alteration necessary for soundness to the north of the site would be within the local wildlife site entirely.
Yes, it is. I mean, there's no denying that the LWS is as it is at the moment. I think, though, just having been there recently, there is the question over this evolving nature of it. Just looking at the photographs from the 2010 survey, the Haycock and Jay Associates, and the parcel of land we were referring to, that at the time was photographs showing extensive areas of ephemeral and short perennial grass, which from recent visits, and you'll see it ultimately, doesn't appear to be there anymore. So it's not like a lot of ecology sites where it's a fixed point in time and you have this habitat and these species. So that's why I don't think there's ultimately necessarily a tension between us saying there is more land available and the LWS boundary. Clearly any application were it to be allocated would have to address that anyway.
Thank you. I can just come back to the council on this final point. So as I understand it, Ms Rawcliffe, there's still a decision to be made by the partnership on the proposed revision to the local wildlife site boundary. Is there any sort of time frame on that at this moment in time?
We don't have a definitive date in the diary as it stands, but there is an intention to meet within the next 12 months. The difficulty is the partnership are primarily local authority ecologists who, through the Environment Act 2021, have effectively begun an awful lot of new duties, so things have somewhat fallen a little bit by the wayside, but notwithstanding that, particularly biodiversity net gain, which I know has been picked up. So to answer your point, there isn't a date in the diary, but I would hope to be getting one in order to resolve the matter, and the evidence is there to support the boundary that we're all talking about today.
Okay.
On the wider point in terms of managing the site, I would absolutely agree with Mr Wood that management would be preferential here, and actually reflecting earlier points made about biodiversity net gain and the difficulties around open mosaic habitat, which this is priority habitat, that could be in better condition through positive management. There is an absolute opportunity on this site to consider a biodiversity net gain delivery site for open mosaic habitat, which would service a large number of developments in the region.
Thank you. Well, I note the policy itself was as a direct reference to the local wildlife site. Mr. Wood, was that from previously or another point?
Just a very quick question, really, just on the timescales. Really, the question is the ecology baseline survey work going to be looked at again? Because obviously we're at 2010 now on the last survey, so I do wonder if there's a need to update it.
I thought the last one was it 2020?
Sorry, 2010, 2020. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm quoting the wrong year.
I don't know if Ms. Wardley, this is just a general time frame as to when sites are revisited, resurveyed. I mean, that's the document that's in front of me for this examination.
I believe that the document we've got will be acceptable to the Local Wildlife Sites Partnership.
Okay. Thank you. I've got no further questions on site SP14. Is there anything further people wish to say to me? Can I just clarify, I mean, this is I think a site I do need to visit, given its location within the green belt. Not necessarily here now, but just in general terms, because it isn't publicly accessible, it's private land. The extent to which could I go onto it unaccompanied on an authorised basis, or would I need to be accompanied by yourself, Mr. Wood, and somebody from the council to safely go on that site?
There's no, to my mind, any intrinsic safety issues. You will see a sign, though, that says part of it is being used occasionally by Northumbria Police Firearms Unit, which might make you stop and pause. Those are set dates, though, when they use it on occasion. So, provided you know what date you wish to visit, I don't think there's a problem with it being unaccompanied. I did send an email to the programme officer to that effect. So, no, we can provide routes where you can get around and things, but just need to confirm a date beforehand.
Okay, well, we'll do that through the programme officer, and I'll rely on your honesty that I'm not going to be there on the day when there's a heightened risk. Okay, thank you. Okay, there's nothing further for today's sessions. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. We'll be reconvening back in this room on Tuesday next week to discuss site SP8 at Fellgate at 9:30. Thank you.